organizations to mess up so you can get a foot in the door, and then, because then it's in the papers, you know, somebody screwed up, there's going to be a very angry letter from Brussels, they're going to get fined, possibly even. And then it's politically a hot item. The city of Leiden, which is a smaller town in the Netherlands, we also have an office there, they messed up their licensing. And they were fined by the Business Software Alliance for 450,000 euros. And they had to pay that, you know, right now, immediately. And they didn't have the cash, it's a small town. So they had to do a special loan with a special bank. And of course, it was a political disaster. And we got in. Because then it's a political item, because, you know, heads are rolling. So the mistakes can be your best moments, basically. And of course, the Business Software Alliance is our marketing tool. And they're great. I mean, whenever they've been somewhere, we go there and we have good conversations with people. Question? Yeah.
I'm interested in, do you get any feedback by the actual user you want to use the, open source software? For example, if you have someone in public office who used the Redmond office for years, now he has to switch to an open office, what not always works as well as it should. Do you get those reactions, or are those people just forced into the software they have to use and you only talk to the government?
No. We've had quite good feedback on a group of civil servants from the city of Amsterdam who have already switched, and they say, you know, it works fine. I mean, there's no problem. You know, there's a little bit of a learning curve, but then there's a learning curve every so many years when they switch Office versions anyway, because, you know, when they switched from Office 2000 to 2003, all of them, you know, got an afternoon of coursework too. So then when they switched from 2003 to OpenOffice, they got an afternoon of coursework and it worked fine. And as studies, and one of my company actually is also running another company that specializes in training people. And their experiences now, and various other researchers have confirmed this, that switching from Office 2003 to 2007 is much more training intensive than from 2000 to 2003 to, for instance, OpenOffice. Because the interfaces are a lot more the same. So yes, there are training costs, but there are always training costs. And the only question is which is more and how much, a big chunk of that. And of course, it's only once. You switch once, and then, you know, for the rest of eternity, you have free software for that part of your IT architecture. But in general, the people who are properly trained, which is very important, have no problem with it. And you must only switch to people if you can provide good applications. So if people need Photoshop to do their work professionally, please give them Photoshop. And if they need AutoCAD to do their work, you know, don't take that stuff away from them. But if they just need a word processor and a web browser and a mail client to do their work, and maybe a terminal window into some big mainframe thing somewhere, it doesn't matter what the underlying OS is, it just needs to be, you know, stable and cheap. I know a few that sort of do that. So.
Okay, a public relation thing. Is it better to say those politicians who oppose open standards and open source are somehow dumb or are somehow corrupt? So, what suits your needs better?
We've never been able to prove corruption. We've never had solid information on that in any way. I've had my doubts sometimes, because, I mean, there's lots of stuff that you can explain by just people not knowing or just by stupidity. I mean, but of course it only goes so far. I mean, at some point you have to think, I mean, come on, people. So, personally, the Antitrust Authority, after having been asked repeatedly, you know, we organized letter campaigns over the last few years. So IT professionals writing to the Antitrust Authority saying, I'm an IT professional, this is what I do, and I see problems with the Dutch IT market, please look into it. You know, they're not saying it's that problem or that problem, they just say, please look into it, because there are indications that there are problems. And so for the last 5 years, they've been structurally refusing to even do the research, saying we don't see a problem. And yeah, I mean, at some point, you know, integrity questions come into play, but we've never been able to prove anything so far. So I generally tend to write it up as just stupidity, or just, you know, not being capable, basically, which is also very bad, but slightly less bad than being corrupt.
Hello? Hello? Yeah.
There were more hands?
One here.
Yeah, over there.
Hello. Yes, you made some comments that you wanted to help out the English with our problems with Microsoft software. I suggest you just watch us and laugh, because the situation is so bad. We have Microsoft advisor in government pretty much writing the policy, so there's almost nothing that you can reason with them at that point, and you will see every single unbelievable loophole and excuse that they can produce now. And so at the moment, a lot of software is now being bought for schools. So and they do this wonderful bundling up where they say we buy the entire school from the company, including the bricks and the computers and the software, and then it's nothing to do with the government. And there's many different cheats in there. But if you've got any other comments, if you know what's happening in England.
Okay, well, we've already had discussions with a group of people in the UK, with UK parliamentarians, so we're going to go ahead. And we just start off with the opposition party and then slowly sort of move in. Just like, I mean, this is what you're describing is exactly what we had in the Netherlands. Some of the responses we got from government asking, after questions had been asked in Parliament about certain issues over the last few years, of course, then those responses would be a Word file. So then, you know, the parliamentarians got the Word file, they would mail it to us, we would open it and sort of, you know, look into all the data, and then it would turn out that it was written on a PC owned by Microsoft the Netherlands or by one of their business partners. So those people would actually be writing the answers for the minister to Parliament. That was sort of, so we had that situation too. And I don't know, maybe, you know, something needs to burst out in flames in the UK, and then we need to grab onto that, something like that. I mean, maybe another NHS failure or something. I mean, you know, 10 billion here, 10 billion there, so pretty soon you're talking about real money, and then you get some political will maybe to do something. But it could take years, but fine, whatever, we'll go. Any other questions? Yeah.
During the last 10 years or so, where we know about open standards and are at least aware about that open standards matter, there was no real advocacy movement for open standards. Mm-hmm. And I was very surprised in the summer. We found out, we had the debate in the Bundestag here in Germany, and I tried a Google write on open standards and found very, very few documents which reflect what the technologists think what open standards are. And there was a lot of marketing garbage and so on. So no real platforms for open standards. And we were also very surprised that all these domain names like Open Standards EU and Open Standards.de, offene Standards.de, they were all free. Yeah, so we could get them. My question is, during the last 10 years, it was, at least this was my perception, that somehow Microsoft had lobbyists that put down the flames that came out of administration, but there was no real movement for open standards pressuring the politicians. Just single letters from individuals. But now this kind of organization building is going on. Do you think that that we will see a kind of domino effect?
I think we've, I'm not sure, of course, I'd like to be optimistic about these things. I think we have turned a bit of a corner in Europe. So there's several countries now adopting, many others looking into it. I mean, in France, many ministries and like the gendarme have already switched. French Parliament is, you know, using Ubuntu on the desktop. So there are lots of things going on everywhere, and of course it's clearly in Europe's sort of interest to move in this direction, given sort of the historic way the software market works globally. But it's not going to come easy. I mean, I think, you know, the switch that is needed in the Netherlands, in my perception, is going to take at least a decade. And, you know, well, so be it. I mean, but I'd rather start that decade now than in 5 years from now, when it would probably not take a decade, but 15 years, because we're going to be sort of, you know, DRM'd up to the eyebrows, and it will be much harder to switch. So that is one of the things I would like to sort of advise to everybody. Every year, every additional year you wait after today, it's going to be harder, because DRM and all those kinds of technologies will also be used to make it harder to switch. They will tie documents to applications, to operating systems, to hardware. You know, the vertical integration is going to be a lot more in the future than it is now. So if you think it's hard to switch now, just wait 5 years and it's going to be hell to pay to do it. So people need to sort of, you know, get started as soon as possible, basically. But I mean, the reason why there was no lobbying, there was no commercial interest. I mean, you know, commercial companies, they have budgets for this stuff. I mean, literally, we're talking literally hundreds of millions of euros per year are spent on professional lobbyists. So these are very well-educated people with all kinds of special training and the best suits and a big expense account, and they take people out to lunch and they have all day to do this stuff. And we mostly just did it in our free time, alongside other stuff you do to pay the rent. So of course you're not as professional, you're not as well. But slowly you can build up a good story, and the basics of our story is very solid. And in the end, I think we won on that, not because of our shiny cars or beautiful suits. So, but it's an uphill fight initially, at least. Yeah. In the back.
Hello. I'm representing Free Software Macedonia. We have developed some recommendations for the government, similar to your policy. But we are trying to push that policy decision to be only made within the government. We are not. We haven't actually tried to put it on the discussion board in the parliament. Do you think that there is any decision? We now think that it's much harder. Because
it can help if you have a person in your government who needs to make that decision, but he may need to be convinced because some of his civil servants are bothering him and saying, oh, this is very risky, you shouldn't do that. If he then can say, well, I might not want to do it, but I'm being pressured by parliament, that gives him sort of cover. So it can help some political people if there is pressure from that side, of the system. But it all depends on sort of the local situation.
And if I may say something, because in Macedonia, 170,000 computers in the education are going to use Ubuntu, which the decision was made only because there were significant cost. It was very cost efficient. But although there are two documents, one regarding open standards and one regarding use of free software in the government, we cannot see much development in that area besides education. So how much do you think that within a year the period is enough for switch to open standards?
I think you really need to clearly document the reason for wanting that kind of change. Because if you just argue on the cost and nothing else, then a couple of companies will fly in and say, oh, we'll give you everything for free. So now our stuff is free too. And then you will be locked in again for another, 5 years. So I think it's important to argue the other issues besides the price, although the price may get you in. But I think it's very important to document all the other stuff and say there's principal reasons why we want to use, in education especially, we want to use tools that say sharing knowledge is good. And we don't want to use tools that say sharing information gets you into prison. I mean, I think that's just a bad educational message, basically. So I think by adding those sorts of elements, you add extra sort of, deadbolts into locking yourself in that course. Last question, because there's people after this. Yes?
My question, do you hear me? No?
It works. Yeah, it's working.
Really? Okay. My question concerns the political organizing you're doing. It seems like you built yourself some kind of local freedom task force in the Netherlands, and I think it's pretty good, and you had much luck, but did you do some networking, like contacting organizations like FSF Europe, who have those fellowship thing to build like the task force you built up in other European countries?
We didn't have any funding. We never had any mandates. We had mail contact. I mean, I know the president of FSF Europe quite well, for instance, George. But mostly it was just literally a handful of people. I mean, literally 3 or 4 people doing it on their own time. It was only sort of over the last half year that we could actually do it for pay. We could do some consulting on it and get money for it. Up to then, it was just sort of advanced citizenship, basically.
And do you plan on sharing your experiences with other
Absolutely, absolutely. Anybody who wants the slides, anybody who wants me to come over and give a talk or do a workshop or mail with you, or my mail address is on the site, so get in touch, and yeah, of course, totally. Okay, thank you.